Okay, so we got some work done on the 944 yesterday, and we're getting one step closer to getting this engine out. What I wanted to do was get the radiator out, and which wasn't too bad, but was a little confusing about what it took to get it out. So I'm going to show you that, and then also I removed the front fairing, which was a real pain, and kind of go over how you get those off if you need to remove yours as well. So the reason we need to take the radiator out, because this engine needs to, once it disconnects from the back, it needs to be slid forward into the space where the radiator is, and the condenser is going to be coming out too, because I'm taking the AC out completely, which removing the fairing makes it a lot easier to get to all the parts. And once we get the engine out, we'll get the rest of the AC lines out as well. Let me show you the fairing first. As you can see, it has seen better days. I considered trying to do some fiberglass work on it, but this thing is toast. But I did find a place that actually sells these things that aren't too expensive. I've been looking on eBay, but most of them are chewed up pretty good. Not quite as bad as this, but even if you find a good one, by the time you mail it, it's not worth the cost. So I finally found a place. Actually, I found two places. The first place had them, but then they didn't have any in stock, and they didn't make them anymore. And then finally found another place that did make them. But there are a ton of bolts to get this thing off. Most of them are relatively easy to get to. They're almost all 10 millimeter. You got one set of screw that goes on the bottom, and then the rest are various bolts that are on the front in various places. Most of them are in pairs. There should be an odd number because there's one that goes in the middle right here that's kind of a standalone, but then I was missing one of the other ones, so I actually have an even number. And then the hardest part about this though is the 3 8 millimeter screws that go through these metal brackets that go on the top of the fairing right here, that come up from the inside right on the fender right here. So one's up front, and you can get to this one with a really long extension. Then the one in the back you can get to from the wheel well, but then the one in the middle is a real pain. On the left side there's an access hole that you can get to, but getting the wrench on it and then turning it barely at all, getting the wrench off, getting it back on, and then turning it, it took a good 15-20 minutes. The other option is to punch out the markers on the side, and then you have access to the third one. On this side, wherever one goes, I couldn't get a good enough position to get enough leverage to loosen the screws, so I ended up doing it from the access hole on the inside of the car. On the right side, you don't have room for the access hole unless you pull this whole thing off, and that's going to be a pain. But you do have an access hole here in the fairing, and then you can remove the marker beacon light pretty easily, and then you can get to that third bit from the outside, so it's not too bad. But knowing where all these pieces are was a problem. So then there's the lights. There's 3 screws that stay in. That one must have broke off. A couple of them broke off, and then these just slide out. You unplug them, and then these are behind it, and then they have an additional screws on the back that those are pretty tough to get out. But if you disconnect the wire, you see the wires hanging down from the car here on both sides. You can disconnect the wire and then undo these screws from the back. And I still have the other one in there because they were pretty good, so I sprayed them with PP Blaster, and I'm just waiting for it to set. So getting the radiator out wasn't actually too bad. I wasn't sure which bolts actually took it out. So there are 4 Allen heads on the bottom, and for some reason one of mine was a smaller size, so two of them were easy, and then the other one was a smaller size. It was in between the 5 and the 6, and then the other one was broken off already, so I couldn't find my vice grips, but I got them out with a pair of channel lock pliers. Took a little bit of effort, but I got them out. And then on top, if I can find them, I put them back in the hole so I didn't lose them. There's 2 more 10mm bolts right here. And I wasn't sure. I thought those might have been for the AC, the way they're the way they look, but they just basically pinch down on top of the radiator. There's 2 on each side. So they go down through these rubber grommets, and then they just pinch it. There's no actual hole. So obviously disconnect all your tubing and your sensor wire, and then even after you get all the bolts out, this thing doesn't, it's loose, but you got to kind of push it to break past the rubber, kind of hold them into the mount. And the mount that goes on the bottom. And mine's pretty bent up too. Actually had a spare one of these from a while ago. So that's basically it. So now all I need to do, hopefully, is put together my engine puller, and then disconnect this thing from the back of the bell housing, and we'll try to get this sucker out. Stay tuned. Save the manual.